Let's talk to Andrew Arthur now. He's a resident fellow in law and policy for the Center for Immigration Studies and a former immigration judge, for that matter. Andrew, good to have you with us, sir.
Thanks so much for having me again, Vince. Greatly appreciate it.
Always nice talking to you. So I understand that you spent some time on Capitol Hill yesterday talking to members of Congress and their staff. What did you find out? What were those conversations like?
Yeah, well, as most people in Washington are probably at least somewhat aware, there is, a current bill that the Biden administration has advanced for funding for Ukraine that is, pending up on Capitol Hill. Republicans in Congress right now, Republicans in the Senate are interested in securing some border security in exchange for that funding. Ukraine funding is not necessarily a 100% winner in the Republican conference. And so in exchange for the funding that the president wants for Ukraine, they actually want the president to do what he's supposed to do and what his DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas is supposed to do, and that's secure the border. That's why we have a DHS.
That's right. So Speaker Mike Johnson today said in a letter to the White House the following, quote, supplemental Ukraine funding is dependent upon enactment of transformative change to our nation's border security law. He referenced H.R. 2, the House Republicans' immigration bill, and said that that is the starting point. And no Democrats, of course, supported that, it actually getting our border under control. From your perspective, what are the chances that the White House plays ball here and actually, enforces our border laws?
Well, and that really is the rub in these negotiations is that while Biden's immigration policies are unpopular with the American people, a recent YouGov poll showed that 62% of voters disapprove of those policies compared to 32% who approve. They're very popular with Democrats. Those numbers are almost completely reversed when it comes to Democrat support for the president's border policies. So the president is going to have to act against the instincts of a lot of people in his own party if he's actually going to respond appropriately to Speaker Johnson, to Minority Leader McConnell on Capitol Hill. But the Republican conference, especially, the staff that I spoke to yesterday, they are 100% behind H.R. 2, which, of course, includes, amongst other things, some asylum fixes, an end to the Biden administration's illegal use of parole, and also mandatory E-Verify, an electronic system that verifies that every person working in the United States is allowed to work in the United States. Most of those things are non-starters for Democrats, and that's why there is an ongoing negotiation on Capitol Hill about those things. But I can tell you, Vince, that from the staff that I spoke to, the members that I know, they are vehement about getting some border security, and right now they've coalesced around H.R. 2. So that's the definition of a Washington impasse. But you and I have been around this town long enough to know that whenever there's an impasse, there starts to be give and take from both sides. So certain things that Democrats don't want, asylum reform, more detention at the border. The biggest problem that we have right now is we're not detaining anybody, which is why people keep coming in. So, it is a negotiation. This is one of those classic Washington situations where both sides want something. Neither side wants what the other side is desiring. So, that's where that negotiation stands. Now, again, this is a pretty significant issue. The president doesn't want to be the person who loses Ukraine because he couldn't negotiate on what's a pretty, common sense issue. But, open immigration, free immigration, illegal immigration has almost become an article of faith for many of those on the Democratic side on Capitol Hill. They're going to have to be disabused of it if they want that money. And I can tell you right now, a lot of people on Capitol Hill on the right are very angry about what's happening at the border and are digging in their heels. And they don't want anymore.
We've heard from a lot of these Democrat mayors who seem outraged by the current state of their cities as a result of this invasion. Will those Democrats join forces with Republicans to get something done here, or are they only asking for more money and more amnesty?
Well, it's interesting. When you listen to Eric Adams, who's the mayor of New York, talk about his border issue, he blames that madman down in Texas Governor Greg Abbott, a Republican. But of late, he's actually started to call out the administration about what they're doing. Now, Adams has his own legal problems, as we're all aware. But and this is a huge question that even many on the left, many political thinkers on the left, like John Judas and Roy Teixeira, who wrote a book, The Coming Democratic Majority, about
Yes.
20 years ago, are warning Democrats, look, this could be a real vulnerability for you, especially in many of those, New York State seats, in many of those Illinois seats, possibly Pennsylvania, because of course there's the Democrats are holding on to a majority in the Senate with a very slim majority. I think it's 2 seats. If they want to maintain that majority in the next election, they're going to have to make people in West Virginia, Montana, Ohio, and Pennsylvania happy. And many of the people in those states are vehemently unhappy with what's going on at the southwest border right now.
By the way, I should point out the book you just referenced, that book from 2004, The Emerging Democratic Majority, authored by John Judas and Roy Teixeira. That was the basis for this, replacement theory stuff from the left. They believed that demographic change, that's what they refer to, basically, the racial change of the country will lead to long-term Democrat victories. That was all spelled out in that book. That's literally the book on the subject. And yet, of course, it's become the source of so much debate. It's a conspiracy theory. I don't know. These guys wrote a book about it, didn't they?
Yeah, no, and it's interesting because, Teixeira in particular is looking at the changes that have taken place. And he's saying to Democrats, you're losing many of those voters that Judas and I said were going to be your base. You're losing, Hispanic workers, particularly business owners and blue-collar workers. You're in danger, now not quite as close as they are with Hispanic voters, but with losing black voters in cities. And, again, Vince, you brought up the very important point about, Chicago, New York. Those are places where we've actually seen, that core Democratic base, those black voters who are angry. They're not
Yes.
even, concerned. They're angry about what's going on,
This is
about the fact that benefits are being given to people who just arrived here when their own communities are suffering.
exactly right. So here's why this is so interesting to me, that the Democrats can't even get on board with nationwide E-Verify. And this gives away the whole game, doesn't it? Because, they count among their supporters the unions. The unions are supposed to represent American workers. And yet there's no support whatsoever for vetting the immigration status of the people who are coming into all of these firms across the country from these Democrats. So they take all this union money, and then they don't do anything to establish that the jobs are actually going to American citizens. It's a scam.
Yeah, and it is one of those shocking things. I've been doing this for 30 years. I can remember when amongst the strongest supporters of secure borders were the AFL-CIO. You never hear them talk about this anymore. You never hear any of these big unions, particularly the ones who represent blue-collar workers like SEIU, talk about the need for that. Now, of course, the reason that they're doing that is because they want to unionize those workers once they get any kind of status in the United States. But the whole basis for a union, Vince, is that we limit the access to labor, and we get concessions out of business in exchange for that. Right now, people, the fact is rich people benefit from open immigration.
Exactly.
We get almost everything cheaper. It's the poorest Americans, as Barbara Jordan said 25 years ago, who suffer under policies like that. And those are supposed to be the constituents that the Democrats care about. Those are the ones that Judas and Teixeira, said were going to be that core base of Democratic voters in the future. And, the reason that Judas and Teixeira are warning Democrats now is because they've lost their way with respect to those individuals. And it's almost as if we've, traded means-tested public benefits, entitlements, welfare for those people in the inner city, to get them to go away and just ignore what's going on at the border and ignore the fact that, their job prospects and the amount of money they could make if they were working is diminishing.
Right. So an example of all of this is what Bernie Sanders used to say about illegal immigration. Bernie Sanders used to be completely opposed to it because he knew that it came at the expense of American workers. And then when he ran for president against Hillary Clinton, he abandoned all of his old positions. He was like, now he's basically for open borders. Now he's for whatever the Democrats are for when it comes to our border. And it's crazy. So in other words, like, the one guy who's supposed to be like the standout in the Democratic Party. Like he's completely different. He only caucuses with them. He's got these really clear views. Even him, he's a total squish on this, and he sold us out.
Yeah, no, it was as recently as 2015 that Bernie Sanders referred to open immigration or massive illegal immigration as a Koch brothers plot.
Yes.
And yet he has completely turned coat on this issue. Although, the fact is it wasn't that long ago that Joe Biden was the guy who promoted strong borders and border barriers, walls along the southwest border. In fact, he gave a speech in Winterset, Iowa, when he was running against Barack Obama back in 2008, in which he said, you're not going to like to hear this, but, when we have those strong borders, we stop drugs from coming in and we stop illegal aliens from coming in. And this is the man who right now has to hold his nose to actually spend money that Congress is forcing him to spend to build fencing along the southwest border.
All right. So these members of Congress you were talking with yesterday, their staff, do you get the sense that there's any wins here in the future, or are we still going to continue with this stalemate where the border remains wide open and Democrats won't budge?
Well, I've been a staffer myself. I did it for 8 years. Got a lot of bills across the line, and the situation in which we were negotiating those very good bills were very similar to what's going on right now. A sum of money the Democrats want and changes the Republicans want. This is a recipe for success. The question becomes whether or not the Republicans botch it, whether they drop it. And, how many of those Republicans, particularly in the House, from Speaker Johnson down, are willing to accept whatever comes out of those negotiations. That's going to determine, the failure or success of this thing. So, it's fun when you're an observer like you and I are to sit on the side and draw lines in the sand. It's very difficult when you're actually in the marble corridors of the Capitol to, actually bring those things to fruition. So it's a question. Do Republicans want, the touchdown right now? Do they want to get that victory? Many do. Many of the people that I talked to were HR 2 or bust. Or are they willing to settle for a modicum of border security and keep plugging away? And again, I'm not saying that either one's right.
Right.
But those are the battle lines that are drawn.
But the sleight of hand the Democrats play here, and it's included in Biden's proposal. Remember, Biden wanted well over $100 billion in foreign aid. He included a $14 billion element that was supposed to address border issues. That $14 billion would be dedicated to accelerating more people into our country, more foreign nationals. That is not a fix. That makes things worse. So when Democrats talk about border security and resolving the challenges at the border, fundamentally what they ultimately mean is amnesty. And certainly in the short term, what they mean is bringing more people in. They think we just need more money for processing foreign nationals into the country rather than securing our border. Am I wrong about that?
No, you're absolutely correct. And the good news for you and your listeners who, really are tuned into this issue is that the Congress is tuned into it too, the Republicans in Congress. They know that simply, offering more money for more Border Patrol agents or more cameras or whatever isn't going to solve the problem. They understand that this is partially a resource issue, but it's a much, much more a policy issue. They know that the policy is that the White House is following is bad. They know the policy that they need to follow to fix it. And so they're in the right direction. The question becomes, whether they reach their destination and what destination they get to. And, here's how this is going to go, Vince. No matter what comes out of this, we're going to see illegal immigration drop for a period of time. The question is, can they get it to drop for an extended period of time, or will the smugglers get smart, figure out the brand new loopholes, and play those games? And, how much the Republicans in Congress are willing to hold the president's feet to the fire, not just in this negotiation, but in the implementation of whatever comes out. None of these rules that the president is abusing are new. These are things that have been in the law in the case of parole for 70 years.
Right.
But, the president is breaking norms and using these things in those ways. And quite frankly, we've seen what happens when norms get broken in this town.
Yeah.
They're very difficult to fix. Congress comes in if they're not happy and takes it away. But it's also important for your listeners who, keep hoping that somehow the courts are going to make this better. The Supreme Court has said, Congress, the White House, this is your problem. This is not a problem for the courts. This is a problem for you to resolve.
All right. Andrew Arthur from the Center for Immigration Studies, thank you as always for your expertise and your insight today. Thank you, sir.